Tiende pamozi ndimtima umo. Tiende pamozi ndimtima umo. Tiende pamozi ndimtima umo. Tiende pamozi ndimtima umo.
Hello everybody and welcome to Entellus School. My name again is Bright Chiwama and I'm pleased to be on this MTN platform to revise past papers with you. I'm a specialist in English language and today we'll be looking at examination tips for both English paper 1 and English paper 2 based on what you as a candidate are supposed to do and not to do. So we'll start with paper 1. And paper 1, as you all know, is essay writing, that is compositions. The maximum number of hours that you have are 1 hour 45 minutes. So we'll look at the tips and then we'll move on to look at the tips for paper 2. Now, for paper 1, you are given a choice of about sometimes 6 to 7 questions and you're only required to write one question. Remember, paper 1 contributes 40% of the marks to the 100 marks that you get. Paper 2 is 60, of course. So for paper 1, you pick one question from section A and pick one question from section E. The question in section 2 is compulsory. Now, if you're handling questions in section A, you're supposed to give yourself a chance to read all the questions for free compositions and allow time to decide one you will write on. Do not waste time, do not waste a lot of time, as you are required to devote approximately 50 minutes to each of the two questions in paper 1. Remember, you have 1 hour 45 minutes. The 50 minutes must be devoted to the first question, and the other 50 minutes must be devoted to the second question in section 2, and the 5 minutes is an allowance for you to read through the question paper. Now, in section A, as you know, you have a variety of questions. And those variety of questions, you are supposed to pick one. Now, the choice of your question will depend on one that you can write from experience. You pick one. It's possible you pick one that you can write from experience or from the knowledge that you know. All right? And then you make sure that you have enough to say, particularly if the composition involves giving arguments. In this particular case, we are referring to an argumentative composition. And then the question you pick, you must make sure that you have sufficient information on that particular question. Remember, out of 6, you can only pick one question. The next, you should consider giving yourself a title. Giving your composition a title, very, very important. Now, in section A, this is of course quite easy because one can use the question picked as a title. But in section B, one should use a technique that was learned under each of the composition in class. Remember, in section 2, you have an article, you have a speech, you have a formal letter, you have a profile, and you have a report writing. Sometimes you might have any other type of under letters. You can have a recommendation letter, an application letter, and so on and so forth. So the technique that you learned in class, that's the one you're supposed to use to write a title. Now, for instance, if you are writing a report, let the format of a report when writing a title be used. Now, after the title, you can get your introduction. So at the beginning of your composition, try to arouse the reader's interest. The reader's interest, you try to arouse the reader's interest by doing the following, by considering doing some of the following things. 1, you could choose to refer to the reader's problems of interest depending on the question, the type of question that you are answering. You could also describe a familiar situation, or you could give a striking example. Others choose to begin their composition by using a striking example, or you could use a famous quotation. For instance, you could be writing a topic that relates to maybe one of these famous people in the world may have written. For instance, Nelson Mandela may have said something about freedom, and if your composition is about freedom, you could pick that quotation, but make sure you know it very well so that you can use it properly and write it properly, and it connects well with what you are writing. You could also ask one or more provocative questions relating to the answer, the type of question that you are answering. You could also contrast the past and the present. For instance, in the 2017 English paper 1, there was a question that talked about what kind of activities the parents did and what kind of activities that the children of nowadays did. So it would be nice to compare the two situations at the beginning so that it could help you to explain your ideas as you move on. Or alternatively, you could state what you want, that you want to correct a common misunderstanding. But this, of course, will depend on the type of question that you have picked. Okay. Now, we are live, and we encourage you to send in your comments, and we'll be able to see if you can see clarifications here and there, and we could answer your questions. Moving on, you should consider to devote most of your composition to your many points. Do not waste time writing irrelevant things. Okay? Don't waste time writing irrelevant things. Consider putting your comments, your writing, and devote most of the comments to the composition that you are writing. It is very, very helpful that you stick to what you are, the topic at point. Now, as you write, you could help the reader to follow what you are saying by, one, stating that you are going to what you are going to do, and then sticking to that point. If you state, for instance, if it's a discursive composition or an argumentative, you state that you've taken which side. Maybe you've agreed with a topic that has been put forward. You do that and stick to it throughout. Then you could also maybe remind the reader at times of your theme. Okay? The theme of your composition. Now, this is drawn from the question. What is your question asking you to do? What is it? What are its limits and limitations, of course. Then, as you write, it is important that you decide to use link words or cohesive devices. Now here, we are encouraging students to make use of cohesive devices such as furthermore, in addition, moreover, next, first, for example, as a result, however. And if you are concluding, one way you can introduce your concluding paragraph is you say to conclude, and then you proceed to conclude your paragraph. The other important key to writing a composition is consider dividing your composition into paragraphs. Paragraphs are very, very important because it will reflect your plan. The way you've structured your composition will be reflected through the way you plan your work and divide it into paragraphs. In this particular case, we are emphasizing that indented paragraphs must be used. You indent all your paragraphs. That is, the first line of your paragraph must be indented, and then in the next line, if you have not exhausted all your ideas in that particular paragraph, the rest of the sentences should start from the margin line. Now, here, as you write your paragraphs, consider using topical sentences. The topical sentence in a paragraph will lead your reader to what you want to say. Now, because this is language, we want you to use the correct form of language, the appropriate language, the formal English, the British Standard English that we teach in schools. So in your language, we want you to use the correct grammatical terms. Do not misplace words and verbs. For instance, it's a common error for students to misuse the following words: been and being. Been and being. Students might mismatch these words. Other examples of words that students commonly misuse are the possessive pronoun there and there. One, remember, is used for position, and the other one is used as a possessive pronoun. Other common examples would be students failing to distinguish or correctly use the following: where and where. Where, as in the WH question that you ask, if you want to locate something, you are locating, you want to ask a place for a place, and then where, which is the past form of are. In the extreme case, a student might also now misuse the word wear, which means dressing up, and then wear for goods. Remember, these are homophones. They are pronounced normally the same, but written differently and used differently. So you must be very, very careful as you write. So you must use the correct grammatical terms. Do not misplace words. Next, the most and the key important thing to your writing is the use of correct spellings. Correct spellings. Avoid use of shortened versions of words and phrases. For instance, we have the case of the word neighbor. It's written as N-E-I-G-H-B-O-U-R. And then you also have the American version of neighbor. The same case applies to words like labor. When you write the word labor, under our British standard, it must be written with an U. But the other version that is there is written like that. Okay. Color, there's a similar mistake there. Meter, the word meter, the hours is the M-E-T-R-E and not M-E-T-E-R. Okay. Now what is worse is also the common use of the word cause when you want to actually use the right or use the word because. Yes, it's a common contraction. We contract words when we speak, but when we write, we need to write them in full. Because. Okay. Next, you must also consider to use the appropriate level of formality and avoid informal words and languages. Here, the word cause again comes in when you mean because, or the shortened message service kind of English where you want to invite someone or tell someone that I've seen you or I see you. Instead of writing it like that, S-E-E, someone would just use the letter C. Those types of versions of words, abbreviations are not acceptable in written language. Punctuation. Correct use of punctuation markers. In here, we are talking about things like capitalization. Okay? When you capitalize, where are you required to use capital letters and small letters? Capital letters are used, one, at the beginning of any sentence. You're supposed to use a capital letter. And then, when you are using a proper noun, and again, when you are using the letter I, this is commonly used in letters, especially in formal letters. The letter I must always be capitalized because it is possible when you use it to identify who it is referring to. That's why we normally refer to it as a proper pronoun. So it must always be capitalized, whether it appears at the beginning of a sentence, in the middle, or wherever it appears. It must always be capitalized. Use of end markers, the full stop and the question mark, commas. Okay? Because if you write your composition without any of these, your composition will be failed on the basis of using run-on sentences. It's a very big crime, and your examiner will not forgive you. Okay? Right. Next, as you construct your sentence construction, the concord, the subject and the verb must always agree. Now, what do we mean? your subject must agree in number, and also the verb that you use must also tally. If your subject is plural, your verb that you use must also be plural. It will not make sense for you to construct. For instance, you write your sentence like this. I are a boy. Now, if you look at that particular sentence, that is not correct. It's not correct because I is singular as a subject. And then the verb, the auxiliary verb you use a plural verb instead of using a singular verb or am. Okay. You use your singular verb am. Okay. So your concord, just the subject and the verb must always agree. Okay. All right. Mukuka, Simeo, thanks for that comment. We are seeing you. Thanks for tuning in live. Spread the message to so many people. Tell your friends about it. Okay. Moving on. You must be able to use a variation of structural terms and sentences to avoid monotony in your language. Use a variety of words and sentences to avoid monotony. Also, take care that you use the correct tenses to describe the situation appropriately. Okay? The word is must be used as it should be. Do not, if you are using if your sentence is in present tense and you want to use the word was, your sentence would be wrong. So all those must be used correctly. Are and where. Are is present. Where is the past. Okay, now as you write, you are encouraged to use figures of speech. Figures of speech will show your ability to have a wide vocabulary, and it will show your examiner that your vocabulary is quite wide. Okay? Your vocabulary is quite wide. So if you use figures of speech in your writing, you are encouraged to use them, especially imagery. I had explained imagery in the other as we were looking at paper 1. This is the writing that appeals, or the writing that is able to excite the 5 senses of a human being. Make your reader see, make your reader hear, make your reader smell, make your reader taste, make your reader feel what you are feeling as you are writing or describing whatever you are writing on. Now, there's a very common error for most students to mistake words that we use in speech and words that we use in writing. And these are contraction of words. Contracted forms of words and abbreviations must be avoided. The only time we can use contracted forms of words is when you are quoting the words that were spoken by someone. For instance, the word don't is acceptable in speech because we want to speak quicker. We want to communicate the message to our listener quickly. We accept. All right? But when you write and you are not quoting the words that were spoken by somebody, you write the word in full. Do not. Okay? Examples are the contracted form of will not is won't. So you will have to write it in full as will not. Yes, we are not saying contracted forms of writing are not correct. Yes, they are correct, but they are used in speech. When you write them in full. Other examples are can't as opposed to using cannot as opposed to using can't. Other types of abbreviations you might find is that if you want to give an example in your writing, some people would opt to use e.g. Okay, so write it in full. For example, like that. Other common abbreviations are etc. and so on and so forth. Then others, if you want to write, for instance, you in your writing, you are talking about ZNBC, Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation. So write it in full, Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation, because our interest is to see that you know how to write Zambia correctly. Remember, we've talked about spellings earlier on. Okay? So you write it in full. Don't even waste time to put it in brackets in its acronyms. So if you've written it in full, that's all. You move on. Then, as you write, most students do not appreciate that words are made in syllables. So as a result, we discourage students from cutting words at the end of a line. If you are writing, for instance, you are writing in a line like this, and you do not have enough space, you want to write the word John. Instead of putting a hyphen there, and then you continue in the next line, don't attempt to do that. It's better you come in the next line and write the full word in full. No one will take you to the police for leaving that space. Okay? Write it in the next line in full. Don't cut it at the end of the line. So we avoid cutting words at the end of a line. And also avoid use of abbreviations, and this I've talked about it earlier in connection together with the contracted forms. Write the words in full. Don't even waste time to put them in brackets. Okay. Now, there are times you could have a question that could have actual figures. For instance, you could be given a table like in the 2017 exam. Candidates were asked to interpret a table that had figures. Use of figures must be avoided. That's why all figures must be in words with only the exception of years and time. Okay? So if in your writing there are figures that are written like this, that are given to you like that, 1,000. Our interest is, yes, the other segments were mathematics, and those are mathematicians. They can accept you to write figures like that. But our interest is to see that you know how to write the word 1,000 correctly and spelled correctly. So you must write it like this. That's the way it's supposed to be. So the only exceptions we can tolerate are years and time. The rest of the figures, 10%, don't write it like this. Write it in full. Our interest is to see that you know how to write the word 10 and cent correctly. Okay? So avoid use of figures. All figures must be written in words with an exception of time and years. Also, it is important to clearly follow the instructions, the rubric that are required when answering questions that you have picked, especially in section 2. Okay? As the question in that section may be based on report writing, speech, letter writing, profile writing, or article. So it is important to stick to the format that you were given in class. Follow those instructions and write it accordingly, because the interest also is to see if you are able to write a report correctly. Do you know the format? Apart from the linguistic ability, you want to see, do you have the skill to write a report, to write a speech? Then, as you write, those in case you have been faced with a question like they brought last year, where you are required to interpret figures, you must be able to interpret them and write them. Interpret that table and explain what it means to a lay person or to a person who is reading. Explain it all. As you head towards concluding your paragraph, consider a suitable way of ending a paragraph. Your composition. Your composition must end, and as you conclude, you must be able to show that you want to end. For instance, you can choose to end by restating the main idea of your composition, or you can summarize the points that you've talked about, or you can draw a conclusion. If it's a discussion, you draw a conclusion, or relate your main idea to the broader context out there. Okay? Or you can simply tell the last part of your story, or use an appropriate quotation, again, the same way that you could have used a quotation at the beginning. Also, you could also conclude your composition with a quotation. And briefly, you might also consider what might happen in the future if the question requires you to do so. So, we'll reflect back. 50 minutes must be spent on each question. Select a question that you can write from experience. Okay? Select a question that you can write from experience. If it's possible, select a question where make sure that you have enough words to use. Okay? Do not misplace words in your language. That is very, very important and key. Okay? Do not misplace words. Use been correctly as opposed to being. To some students, I don't know how that sounds the same. Use there correctly. Where? Use correct spellings. Avoid use of shortened versions. Stick to the appropriate level of formality and you avoid informal English. Punctuation must be correct. Correct use of punctuation markers. The capital letters, the end marks, the commas, the exclamation mark, all those. Because if you write that, it's like serving raw food to someone. If you write your composition, you do not put any of those punctuation markers. They are like spices in food. Can you imagine being invited for a meal and then you are served raw meat? Yeah? You open a plate, you find raw meat and it is blood there in that particular plate. So write that. Spice your work with the punctuation markers. Too many punctuation marks spoil your work. Okay? Put them where it's necessary. Too few, again, it means your writing will have lacked the salt. The spices are not enough. Yeah? For those that are very familiar, those that take food and nutrition, you know, you may have not marinated your chicken properly if it is not punctuated nicely. And it gives a very bad taste. Okay? So, when you are ending your sentence, use a full stop. When you are pausing, use a comma. If you are asking a question, use a question mark. Okay? If you are expressing an emotion, use an exclamation mark. That's why those markers are there. Okay? Then, sentence construction, the verb and the subject must always agree in number. Always remember, your subject must be, if it's singular, the verb must also be singular. Only in very rare exceptions, and you can easily explain that. There are rare exceptions where that it cannot work, but in most cases, that is the correct way of constructing sentences. Tenses. If you are talking about something in the present tense, use the present tense. If you are talking about something in the past tense, use the past tense. Okay? Do not contract words. Contracted forms are used in speech. When you write, you are using your own words. You write all the words in full. You write do not as opposed to don't. Write cannot as opposed to can't. There are so many other kind of contractions that are there. All must be written in full. Cutting words at the end of a line is discouraged. Figures must be avoided. All figures must be in words. Okay? And follow each instruction. The instruction that how you are supposed to write each type of composition. A narrative has got its own style. A report has got its own style. A speech has got its own style. And so on and so forth. So, we'll shortly take a break, but thank you very much to those of you that are sending in comments. You can send more. Tell your friends. Tag your friends. Tell them MTN is doing it. To us over. Go for a short break.
I told the bus driver that I work hard for my money, so it better gets to Chiwama.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I told him.
Yeah.
Weather, drama nizingono, or nizambili.
Tituma. And he kept trying to tell us something, but I was like, Ukagamba, Tiloa.
Cause cash money yeve across Zambia.
Tituma. At bus and Kuchpat. The end of South Africa. Hello, what?
Run, K-Star, run!
Sending money doesn't have to be this dramatic. Open an MTN mobile money account today and send money to friends and loved ones across Zambia instantly. Dial *303# to send money with MTN, Zambia's #1 network. With MTN mobile money, Tituma.
MTN, everywhere you go.
Rise up this morning, smile with the rising sun. 3 little birds pitch by my doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true, saying, this is my message to you. Singing, don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright. Singing, don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright. Cause every little thing is gonna be alright.
How you use your data is up to you. With the widest network coverage, it's amazing what you can do on MTN.
This is my message to you.
Welcome back. Welcome back to this MTN Telescopes. Please keep tagging your friends. Tell them about MTN. The revision is here, grade 12s. This platform is helping you to prepare for exams, final exams. Spread it as much as possible. Tell everyone. Ask them to download the MTN TV Plus. And also, ask them to like the MTN Facebook. This is where it's all happening. There's mathematics, there's English, and other subjects. Okay, so we can move on to paper 2. Now, paper 2 is written in 2 hours. 2 hours, you have the whole time to you to write your exam. And remember, paper 2 contributes 60 minutes to your final grade. Whatever you get in paper 1 is added to what you get in paper 2. But like I said yesterday when we were looking at the last year's paper, paper 2 is like a blessing. It's given to you. And when it's given to you, all the answers are there. The only thing you have to do is apply your effort to looking for those answers from that particular paper. All the answers are there. You bear me witness. For the vocabulary in the structure, the choice of answers are given to you. For the transformations, part A is given. You are only supposed to change a bit, but not the meaning, but adjust the structure and maintain the same meaning. So all the answers are there. You are just looking at the answers. In the comprehension, the answers are there in the passage because you are required to pick questions, pick answers from the passage that is given in front of you. It's right in front of you. The summary is the same thing. You are asked to just summarize a passage that has been provided in front of you. It is right there for you. So all the answers are there in paper 1, and it's possible for a candidate to get 60 out of 60. When you get 60 out of 60, you will agree with me that that's already a merit, a 4. Before you even wonder and wait for your marks from paper 1, you would already be swimming in a merit if you make sure that you get everything in paper 2. So now, we'll start with question 1, which is a structure. Now the structure there has 2 sections, each weighing 10 marks. Thus, the structure contributes about 20 marks, with a comprehension bringing 20 marks and summary bringing 20 marks to a table, and thereby making a total 60 marks that you get. So, each question under the structure, in section 1, it normally tests on the vocabulary of students. For instance, in the 2017 paper, the test was based on the vocabulary testing, and each question had 4 options provided. Now, candidates were expected to select the best words or phrases that are or that were closest in meaning to the underlined word in a sentence. Now, candidates were to write the highlighted answer in the spaces provided in the question paper. Now, how do you make sure that you know which words to pick? Just in case the word that is underlined is beyond your vocabulary, you don't know it, but you're already in the exam, there's nothing you can do. You can't consult a dictionary. You are not permitted to do that. Consider trying to understand that word from the way it has been used in context. Relate the few words that you're able to understand from the sentence and see how they are used in connection with a word that you probably do not understand, and you will have probably arrived at a correct answer. Section 2, the question has 10 questions of transformations worth 10 marks. Candidates were supposed to write the questions given using the instructions on each question. Now, it is common for students under transformations to think they can memorize the answers. Okay? Think they can memorize the answers. But the best is you are supposed to know the structure behind each and every question under transformations. The same way that you would also use a bit of understanding of the structure under vocabulary, even here. So, in this part of the questions, candidates are strongly advised not to change the meaning of what is put across in part A of each question. Remember, there are two sentences given. One that is complete in part A, and the one that you are supposed to complete in part B. So when you rewrite the sentence, you should not, and I'll repeat, you should not change the meaning of a sentence. Bisalom Patrick, thank you very much. I see you. Chipata, how is Chipata town? Okay. Now, you see, the secret behind answering these questions under transformation is understanding the structure. And again, refer back to what you learned in class. That will be very helpful. The contrast structure, the reason, the time clauses, the intensifiers, okay? The invasion, the passive form. All those are structures that you need to look at. Starting from grade 10, parts of speech, all those will be helpful to use in this particular segment. So, like the 2017 question tested, most of the students assume that this section can be answered simply by memorizing answers. But that's not the key. The most important skill the candidate needs is to appreciate and understand each and every structure that is being taught. Now, when we talk about the structure that is being taught, we are referring to those that I have just mentioned. Applying the rules that govern such a structure, the skills needed are taught from grade 8 up until 12. The lower grades, and even the lower grades, as English is a build-up from what we acquire, even in the early as grade 1. So here, there are no two ways about it. The candidate just has to know the structure that is under each particular question. Then, once you know that, then you are good to go. That's about question 1, the structure, the vocabulary, and the transformations. So, as you sit and prepare for this final exam that you'll be writing on the 29th of October. English, by the way, is being written on the 29th of October, and both papers are written on the same day. Paper 1 is the first. You'll be given a short break. Paper 2 is the next. Do not rush home after writing paper 1, hoping to write paper 2 the next day. Clearly look at your timetable. Okay. So, that is the secret behind that. And how do you improve your vocabulary? Engage yourself in reading, extensive reading. Don't force yourself to read things that you do not enjoy. Remember, the best way to learn is to read for pleasure. And when you read for pleasure, you are getting the words, even without realizing that you know how to use and the meaning of this word, you will have learned it. Engage yourself in reading. Okay? Of course, pick on the correct material that is properly edited to read. You might say the things to read are not there. Bibles are available in most homes, and they are written in correct English. The story of Genesis, for instance. Okay? The Bible book of Luke. You can read that. It's an interesting piece of account. Okay. We can move on to question 2, and question 2 is a comprehension. Question 2 is a comprehension. Now, the word comprehension means understanding and all the questions seek to find out if a given passage has been understood. Candidates can be tested in two ways. You have objective and subjective questions. Now, under objective questions, a number of alternatives, that is the multiple choice, are given, and candidates are asked to choose the best based on the information that is in the passage. It's not guesswork. Okay? Then under subjective questions, there are times that a question would demand that candidates use their own words to answer questions. So in this case, candidates must have the skill to evaluate every answer and arrive at the best possible answer from the choices given. Okay? So a candidate must be able to express themselves in subjective questions because they demand that you write in your own words. The questions there demand that you write in your own words. And you must have the ability to locate information according to the question. And you must further be able to discriminate facts from opinion. In this particular case, I would encourage the students to take good care of what you might interfere with your reasoning. Remember, the passage is provided to you, and that's where you're supposed to pick all the answers. Now, there are times that you could be given a passage that contains information that you do not agree with. Remember, it's temporal. You are just in an exam for a short period. That's 2 hours. Forget about those things, and if they are so strong and they touch on your personal emotions, forget about all those things. Stick to what the passage mentions and understand it as it has been given to you. I'll give you an example. Around 2006, there was a passage that was given to students that had information on what our colleagues that have come from other countries as refugees experience on their way to countries of refuge where they go. Now, because around that time, most Zambian communities had our friends from other countries, and they may have mentioned what probably they experienced. But the passage had its own issues. So the problem that was faced was that candidates were bringing out issues from outside, what they've heard, against what was contained in the passage. Now, if you do that, you end up failing because the information that you are bringing from outside may not be part of what the facts that are provided in the exam. Okay? So, stick to the passage. Follow it stick to it as strictly as possible. Stick to what it mentions. Okay? So again, the ability to locate information is called to question again here. You must be able to discriminate facts from opinions. Now, what categories of questions do you find here? One, you might find plain sense questions. These try to test factual or exact or surface meaning from as it is mentioned from the passage. Then you could have implicative type of questions where these ones test the pupil's ability to infer, deduce information, and emotional suggestions and figurative use of language. Then there are those that try to test the relationship to thought. These test the relationship between sentences, paragraphs, and a bit of summary skills there. And then you have projective questions that require integration of data from the text with a pupil's own knowledge or experience. But these do not really ask you to give your opinion from outside. But then what is important is to mention, to conclude based on what is in the passage. And then there are those questions that test the grammatical relationship, those that demand a response signal or structural words. And normally in our setup, that is normally the last question in paper 2 under comprehension, where you are either asked to pick synonyms that are underlined in the words that have been mentioned in the question, or antonyms. For last year, question 10 changed the format a bit. Instead of looking for synonyms, it went on. It asked for antonyms. So students who are not very careful, they didn't read the question carefully. They picked the synonyms instead of antonyms. Now, what are some of the causes of errors in objective questions? That is the multiple choice questions. In this particular case, for paper 2, the questions from question 1 up to 9. What can cause a candidate to fail to pick the correct question? Number 1 is, it could be misunderstanding the plain sense questions. You misunderstand it. Secondly, it could be as a result of making a wrong inference. Okay? You infer information from the passage, but you conclude wrongly. Okay? Or reading more into the text than actually there is. This now relates to bringing out experiences from outside other than what is contained in the passage. Also, assumptions, usually based on personal opinions. Here, I would caution all friends of ours. Yes, we are very religious people in Zambia. And here is a question that discusses things relating to what we do not believe in. Yes, it may sound like it's a very big sin if you go against your beliefs, but here you are sitting for an exam. Just go ahead and answer it as it was there. Or you might sometimes fall for a flashy phrase in a sentence that is meant to distort you from picking the correct thing. Okay? Or misunderstanding figurative use of language. Okay? Remember, words that are used figuratively in passages do not mean what is on the surface. The surface meaning might be different. Okay? Then you could also be as a result of failure to follow relationship of thought. Failing to distinguish between a general idea and the supporting detail. Again, an error could result from failing to see the force of modifying a relationship between words and groups of words. And lastly, failure to take in the grammatical meaning of words. So, look out for some of those things that can cause you to fail to pick the correct answer. Remember, stick to what is in the passage. Mukuka, thank you very much for tuning in. Austin Piri, Bisalom, we are with you. We are glad. Spread the message to your friends. Tell them about it. Tell them about MTN Twasova. It's on. And it has come with a bang. Now, moving on. Candidates must take notes and they must pay attention to the following. The vocabulary that they can interpret the meaning of individual words and phrases. Here, your vocabulary is called into question. Remember, you are being tested on understanding. So, your vocabulary used in the passage, pay attention to it. Interpret the meaning of individual words and the phrases used there. Then you also must have the ability to observe accurately everything of importance in the test. Any important point can make or break your answer for a comprehension. Then you must also have the ability to interpret the author's meaning, either from what he states or from what he has implied. Remember, implied meaning in language is a common way of putting the message across. Okay? It could be a comparison. But a comparison, you find that that particular sentence does not directly use the word like or as or any other comparison structure. Okay? I'll give you an example. If in a particular sentence, there's a phrase that says, John is a snake. John, there's something that a snake displays that is being compared to the character of John. So if you take it literally, or you infer wrongly, you might misunderstand this and say John actually at some point turned into a snake. But what is being discussed here is metaphorically put such that the character that a snake has One of the weird characters that a snake has is what John displays in his behavior. Okay? Biblically, a snake is described as being a very cautious and an animal that can deceive you. So John probably has that ability. He has that trait, and that's what is being mentioned here. So you need to infer the meaning. That expression has been used metaphorically. So that's about a comprehension. Now the last part of the question, this asks candidate to summarize. It's a summary question, a prose summary. From the onset, let me put it across to you that there are two important facets to this. One, your answer must be in prose. Prose meaning it must be in connected, readable sentences. Okay? And they must come out in form of a paragraph. Connected and readable sentences. Remember, the summaries will ask you to pick the relevant points. So it is those relevant points that you must make into connected sentences, and they must be readable. And remember, it should be summarized. The other key point is the word limit. Every summary question that you are being asked to write in prose dictates how many words you should use. That is key. All right? So, by definition, a summary is a brief and clear statement in a connected and readable shape of substance of a longer passage. Why are we saying of a longer passage? Because you are being asked to pick information from a passage and summarizing it according to the dictates of a question. So the following are features of a summary. Number one, it must be written in prose. Okay? That is, your answer should be present in points in groups with established meanings and linked together. Make it easier for the examiner to follow your line of thought. Connect your sentences with link words. Remember, under paper 1 we looked at link words. Examples of link words could be additionally, furthermore, moreover, ever, firstly, secondly. All those are linking words, cohesive devices that are used in language to connect ideas. Okay? And secondly, your summary must be brief. Summary must be brief. Now, the summary must be brief in the sense that a great deal of meaning is put in as few words as possible. Stick to the limited number of words advised. See what the question demands and scan for that information in the passage. All right?